Welcome to the Never Too Early Fantasy Football Podcast, where it is never too early for fantasy football. My name is Jeff.
And I'm Alex.
Hey, Alex, how's it going today?
It's going well. Another day on the podcast.
Dude, we are 6 weeks away from the NFL season, and I cannot wait for it because I am starting to get the itch to really start diving into some draft stuff. And that was exacerbated this week with the news that we're getting from all these camps. So, as always, thank you for downloading, listening, liking, and commenting on our podcast videos. Please subscribe to us on the socials. We are on Spotify, YouTube, Facebook, Instagram, TikTok, Twitter, and Threads with the handle at N2EFantasy. Alex, what are some of these news items that came out of camp?
Well, this week is all about the signings, re-signings, and health of all the fantasy prominent names and even some of the classic names out there. But we have a big quarterback re-signing. So one of the top quarterbacks who's been waiting on a deal got a deal done. We also have some pretty good news coming out of San Francisco that we can talk about as well. We got some Jimmy Garoppolo news. We have some Saquon Barkley news that we can cover, as well as some other Giants signings. So I don't want to spoil everything on this list, so let's just dive into it with the big news of today. And that is Trayvon Diggs signed a new extension with the Cowboys, right, Jeff? That's the news that you wanted to cover?
That's exactly it. Actually, we don't cover defense as much as we should on this podcast. That is a pretty big signing. But the signing that we did want to cover just happened hours ago, and that's the Chargers signed quarterback Justin Herbert to a 5-year, $262.5 million extension. This is actually pretty big news.
It is. But just to clarify, we don't cover defense. Defense covers us. So let's just see.
I applaud you, sir.
Coming at you with the jokes. First thing, but Justin Herbert signing an extension with the Chargers is one of these big moments that we've been waiting for this offseason. We do have Joe Burrow is presumed to be next on the pecking order for signing his also probably going to be a massive deal, but it is very important for the Chargers to have locked down their skipper, their starting quarterback, the guy who's going to move this new Kellen Moore offense to the next level. So I'm excited for them. I'm excited for fantasy. Got a lot of guys that depend on this quarterback, Keenan Allen. We have Eckler and Williams, as well as the new wide receiver there, Johnson and Palmer. So we're excited that he could get that locked down. No holdout for him.
Yeah, I think it'll be really interesting to see which route that Joe Burrow does go with this. Is it going to be like the 5-year 265 because we know he'll blow by the Justin Herbert contract here, or will he go the Mahomes route where it'll be like a 10-year $550 million contract and just lock in the 10 years with Burrow? So it'll be interesting to see which path that Burrow goes here, but I don't really see any barriers to Burrow getting his deal done now that Herbert's done.
You know what I want to see, Jeff? I want to see some void years. I want to see Burrow sign a 10-year contract that's really a 3-year contract with 7-year void years to make it work.
You act like he's going to retire at the age 26 or 27.
No, they could just renegotiate it at a certain point and just keep it going. But no, I think that Burrow's going to get a massive deal. I think he's going to keep it close to this 5-year, $262.5 million. I think it's going to be in that range. I don't think he wants to go too far because then his wide receivers won't have any money, and he wants to keep them happy so he can keep performing to a high level as well. I don't think anyone's going to do a Mahomes 10-year deal, got a discount for the team. I just don't think that's going to happen again.
I mean, that's how you keep those wide receivers.
Yeah, I guess.
That's his path. That is his path. Speaking of paths, though, we have a running back re-signing in Justin Jackson. He is one of my favorite running backs, but I do know he's getting up there in age, so he won't be anything other than a good depth addition at this point. But another solid signing by the Lions just to make sure that they're covered every which way if someone goes down, or they just feel like they're a deeper team this year.
Yep. And as we talked about last week, I think we both really like the Lions this year, and they seem to make sure that they have no weak points. And I think that's a pretty solid strategy. It looks like another team that's shoring up their running back room is the Ravens signing Melvin Gordon, who also seems to be a pretty good depth addition, Jeff, don't you think?
Yeah, I just don't really know where he slots in. Does he slot in after J.K. Dobbins, or does he slot in after J.K. Dobbins and Gus Edwards? So that'll just be interesting to see how it shakes out in camp. I do think this really hampers the value that Gus Edwards would have had behind J.K. Dobbins. And if someone's holding on to Gus in a dynasty league and you're deciding whether or not to hold on to him or let him go, it's probably safe to let him go at this point.
I mean, does anyone really have value in the rushing department outside of Lamar Jackson?
I think J.K. does. I mean, didn't he have like a 4 touchdown rushing game last year against, I think, against the Bills?
I think that
So
was all of his stats was in that one game.
he was recovering from his ACL tear, and he is doing much better. And hopefully, 1 year behind, or putting that injury 1 year behind him, and hopefully Lamar rushing a little bit less will help add some running back value to that team. Hopefully, it'll add some wide receiver value to that team as well. Not a good start for the wide receivers here in Baltimore. Rashad Bateman didn't show up to camp. Then he showed up to camp, and then he goes on the pup list. Like, I don't really know what was happening there, and I think we'll get more details as time goes on. Do we think that Rashad Bateman was disappointed with his contract? Do you think he's disappointed with his role? Or do you think this is actually just a straight injury and that's why this all happened?
Can I answer all? Is that an answer? Can I say it's all of them?
Yeah, it could easily be because we do know that people have a way of holding in, and I know that's become a much more popular phrase these days, but basically, this is a hold out inside of camp. So that's kind of what it feels like to me. And he's now the third wide receiver at best on this team.
Yeah, imagine going into the offseason thinking that you're going to be maybe not the number one receiving option because Mark Andrews is there, but the number one wide receiver. And all of a sudden, the team adds a phenomenal, almost Hall of Fame type wide receiver in Odell Beckham, and for a $15 million deal, and then brings in a first round rookie wide receiver that's pretty high profile. So now all of a sudden, you're the third wide receiver and fourth receiving option on that team potentially. And he is coming off of an injury. He hasn't quite put it together yet. The quarterback that he's been working with hasn't thrown for over 4,000 yards, as far as I know. So it doesn't look great for him. And he knows that this is a year he has to step up if he wants to get paid. And there's no reason the Ravens should give him any money until he can prove that he can keep a season together and have a good year. So the odds are stacked against him now, and I don't think he's very happy about it.
Agreed, agreed. And I don't think he has much fantasy value this year unless Flowers or Beckham goes down. So
Yeah, it's tough to pinpoint that wide receiver group for sure when it comes to fantasy. I think all of them right now are looking like wide receiver threes at best or flexes. I don't think any of them really break into the top group that we're looking for. But that'll be next episode. We'll find out, won't we, Jeff, on the next episode?
we will, we will. We're breaking down our top 24 wide receivers. So be on the lookout for that in the next few days.
Well, we can move on. Quarterbacks out there. Jimmy Garoppolo, guys, has officially passed his physical, so the Raiders don't have to cut him. He actually has a chance to start this year. Jeff, what do you make of Jimmy Garoppolo? Do you think it's a positive sign for the team? Do you think he stays as the starter for the year? What do you think about Jimmy passing that physical?
So I think the outlook on the offense now gives it a shot to be better than it would have been otherwise. I think that Devonta Adams owners and prospective owners can sigh a little bit of relief here because they do have a quarterback that could get him the ball. And I think it's great news considering the doom and gloom of the offseason on this. Do I think Jimmy Garoppolo is going to be like a fantasy quarterback for anybody? No. But if we get Josh Jacobs in there and we have Adams and Myers and the rookie Mayer at tight end, they actually have some really good weapons for Jimmy Garoppolo. Now, we do know in the past Jimmy Garoppolo has at most been able to support two weapons at the same time. So I expect a little bit of the same to continue with the Vegas Raiders here. Any other quarterback news that we have, and then anything on Jimmy Garoppolo that you have for us?
No, I disagree with you. I just agree on everything that you said with Jimmy Garoppolo. He doesn't really move the needle for me. I know he is in the back end, quarterback two, quarterback three for those two QB leagues, but he's not someone I'm going to draft in a single quarterback league. But as you were alluding to, other quarterback news out there is the 49ers quarterback, presumed starter, Brock Purdy, has been cleared and ready for camp. He should have no limitations, is basically what the GM John Lynch said. So we're looking for him to have a really good year. We're not sure if Trey Lance is even going to hit the field at all. So that'll be interesting how that quarterback group shakes out. I like him as a top QB2, and I think that he could have some pretty good stats this year. But pretty good news all around.
Pretty good indeed. I think this is great news for the 49ers. They have their quarterback to start week one. I think McCaffrey, his first full year in this offense, I think Debo can kind of settle back into his role. I did like the chemistry between Purdy and Ayuk, and I also liked it between Kittle and Purdy. Like, I just think that this offense is actually going to be really smooth this year, as long as Purdy's healthy.
Let's hope. It's a very exciting offense with Shanahan out there in the West, but we've got more Jameson Williams news. He apparently suffered a minor leg injury in camp along with that 6-game suspension. So I guess it's a good thing he's suspended, so it gives him 6 weeks to recover in the regular season.
Yeah, I think he's going to be completely fine, and I think this extra time will help him get super healthy for this year, which is something that he needs after last year. And I do expect him to contribute for this team. And he is a wide receiver that I'm looking in later rounds to stash in fantasy drafts.
I almost want to bet on how many games he plays this year.
The language that
Just
you just used there.
I know. Just to call back on the reason why he was suspended was for betting. So, I got all the jokes today. All right.
Sure is. And we have another player returning after an absence, not for betting this time, but Saints sign their former star tight end, Jimmy Graham, to a deal. Do you think that Jimmy has anything left? He sat out the entire year last year.
I just don't know what to make of this tight end group. It was already murky before, and now they added another tight end. I don't know. Jimmy Graham is a good tight end. He's been out for a year. He is aged up. I just don't know if this is a sentimental move on the Saints' part. I don't know if Jimmy Graham gets significant targets, but surely Derek Carr is going to throw for 6,000 yards this year, right?
That's what it's looking like with all the weapons that they have around him. But I would bet against it, and I would bet that everyone's stats are slightly lower than they would have been otherwise.
Well, the GM Mickey Loomis did say that Michael Thomas should be ready to go for week one as well. So Michael Thomas, Olave, Jimmy Graham, Jawan Johnson, like I don't know who gets all the stats here, man. Who gets all this? Alvin
Uh,
Kamara, we don't know if he has a suspension yet or not. Like he could get a bunch of yards too.
I think at 36, it's safe to say that Jimmy Graham's not going to be like a focal point of this offense. He'll be he'll be like a secondary weapon that plays maybe like 10 to 15 snaps a game, and you got to watch out for him those 10 to 15 snaps if he plays at
Big,
all.
yep, he'll be a big red zone target. He'll be vulturing touchdowns away from Olave and Michael Thomas.
And I know we've seen before where a player does come back, gets into practices and says, "I can't do this anymore," and retires. So there, it's not outside of the realm of possibilities. It'll be really interesting to see what happens with Jimmy Graham, and I just don't expect a ton from him. It's more of a sentimental story, in my opinion.
Well, also an interesting, not sentimental, but a sentiment out there. All the prominent running backs apparently coordinated and set up a Zoom meeting so that they can all gripe about their situation. I think it's interesting that they did that and it was so public. I feel like that's something you'd want to keep quiet and not let out. And it just makes them look like a bunch of crybabies, in my opinion, because there's not much they can do. Tuff, what do you think that this accomplished? What do you make of it?
So I think that there's not much they can do. So this was a brainstorming session where there isn't really many ideas to come out of it. They coming out of it, they had the ideas of faking injuries, holding out, holding in. anything that they could possibly do to raise their leverage, and they just don't have it right now. And it's not because they're not talented, it's because there's so much talent out there that they're much easier replaced than they would have been otherwise. The elite ones should still get paid, they should still get the franchise tag, but the elite ones, there's not that many elite ones. There's more good to great ones than there are elite ones these days.
You know, it kind of seemed like a group therapy session, and I think that Nick Chubb had a really good quote for the running back situation, which I'll just paraphrase because I don't remember word for word, but it was like if a running back puts up 2,000 yards this season, that doesn't help him get a contract because now a team views him. Their success goes against them because now the team's like, well, you got 2,000 more yards on you, so that you're less valuable because of that. So it it really hampers running backs to actually perform. So they're hurt either way. If they don't perform, team doesn't want to give them money. If they do perform, team says you got more wear and tear on you. So what are they supposed to do? And I really feel for them. I really do because you should be able to pinpoint that this running back has been steady. They've steadily gotten like 1,200, 1,400 yards multiple years in a row. Their yards per carry has not gone down. You should be able to say, hey, let's give you a new contract. We can definitely front load it so you get your big money up front while you're still good, and then we can renegotiate it towards the end of the deal. That's what teams should do. But teams don't have to because the franchise tag is cheaper than paying these really good players a long term contract.
Right, absolutely. But I still think like your Chubbs, your McCaffreys, they'll be paid, and Henrys will be paid of the world, but those are be few and far between.
But Jonathan Taylor, will he get paid, Jeff?
I don't really know. I think that so Jonathan Taylor's situation is really interesting. He did report to camp after they said that he wouldn't report to camp or he wasn't anywhere near camp. There was reports of that, but he did come to camp and then he went right onto the PUP list. And kind of like Rashad Bateman, is this really an injury or is this a hold in with a contract situation? I think it's the latter.
Yeah, I agree there. I don't know what the recourse is. The Colts don't look to be that great this year. It's kind of almost similar to Josh Jacobs, but he's technically under contract, so I don't know if I mean, I guess you could do a hold in and fake an injury, but I don't think it looks as good for him. But we do
Right.
know someone who did get paid even after he participated in the gripe session. Saquon Barkley came back, signed his franchise tender, and the Giants added $1 million in incentives as well as gave him a 2 million upfront bonus. So Saquon's like, sure, guys, let's all hold out together, and then came right back and signed his tender. What do you make
Well,
of that?
I think that describes the solutions that came up on that meeting. There really aren't any good solutions, so you might as well take money when you can. And that's kind of what Barkley's doing here. And he went back to the Giants and he was like, "Yo, can we just throw on some incentives on here?" Now he didn't reach the numbers that he put on here last year, but they were within arm's reach of where he was last year. So I do fully believe that he will get to his incentives this year. If I were Daniel Jones, I would make sure that Saquon Barkley gets the stats to get these incentives because he's the reason why Barkley didn't get paid, in my opinion.
Well, I think that if he plays all 17 games, I think he'll get it regardless. I think he did have the receptions his rookie year, but obviously he didn't have 65 receptions last year, which is one of the criteria. And then is 1350? Is that the rushing yards? Something like
That is
that?
correct. He was at like
He
13-10 last year, somewhere around there.
Yeah, 13-12 is what it looks like. So I think obviously if he plays all 17 games and maybe not even all 17 games, he can still reach it. He was very close to it last year, playing only 16 games. So I think that he can probably do it. But good for him for being able to get a little bit more than just a franchise tag. So kudos to him. Hopefully Josh Jacobs can do something similar, but we'll see how that goes.
And I believe with that, if he does hit his incentives and he got tagged again next year, that 120% comes from the tag plus the incentive. So
I don't know if the incentives. So the incentives they don't count this year because he didn't reach them last year. So they're
They don't count against the cap. But if he gets
right.
tagged again next year, I think his whole salary from this year gets that 120%
I
multiplier
think
because
it
that's what the second tag is.
I think it only counts if he achieves them. So if he achieves them,
Yeah.
then it will.
Yep, and I anticipate him to achieve them. But 120% of the 10 million that he's getting would be 12 million next year. So, I mean, he's still in line for a pretty big salary after this year too because he will get tagged again.
Hopefully they can get it worked out, but it's interesting because we've pointed out in past episodes that we don't really like the situation that the Giants would have faced if they didn't have Barkley because their running backs there, it's Breida and Gray. They're not very awe-inspiring. Well, the Giants went out and they signed another running back that's very familiar to fantasy owners in James Robinson. I don't know if James Robinson has that much left at this stage, but excuse me, but he's still what 25, 26. Maybe he's healthier this year than he was last year. And they also signed Cole Beasley, so they brought in another big, name if not prominent player in Cole Beasley. They have a million slot receivers now, so I don't know where exactly he fits or if someone else is going to end up being gone at some point, but these guys were brought in before the Barkley news dropped, so we thought maybe they'd be helping replace Barkley's production a little bit, but it seems like they've got all three of these guys, so I don't know how this shakes out, how these targets shake out. Jeff, what do you think of these? What do you think of these two additional guys, James Robinson and Cole Beasley?
So let me start with James Robinson. He's 24 years old right now, so he's still a little young guy here.
Okay.
And he's 2 years away from the Achilles tear now. But if we remember correctly with Dante Foreman, it took him like 3 or 4 years to get fully recovered from the Achilles tear. So he might need another year in order to regain his form that he was before the Achilles tear. The really cool thing about that is he'll be 25 at that point, and he still would have like 3 years left in a running back prime. And so James Robinson, just this year, I'm not super excited about him, but I'm not ready to write him off forever because I've seen it from him before. I know he's a grounder and a pounder, and I also know that he could potentially recover from this. He could rebound his entire career. Maybe on the Dable offense here behind Barkley is a good way to not work a ton, rehab it, hopefully hit the ground running next year. But moving on to the wide receivers. So the Giants have a ton of injuries. They put Sterling Shepard and Wan'Dale Robinson on the pup as they're both recovering from torn ACLs. And I'm wondering if there's a couple of different avenues here that I could see the Giants going. Beasley's a camp body, could completely see that right now, waiting for Shepard and Wandell to come back into the fold. Other thing I could see is they say Shepard and Wandell, we're leaving you on the pup to start the season. You guys are missing 4 games each. And then you keep a couple of those additional wide receivers that they sign, like the Cole Beasleys of the world, the Paris Campbells of the world, the
Crowder.
Darius Slaytons, Crowder. They have a ton of wide receivers right now with high like there's disgusting amount of wide receivers on that team right now, and they're going to have to go through a big amount of cuts. But a way to prevent having to go through so many cuts might be leaving Shepard and Wanda on the pup to start the year and help them recover a little bit more, keep them fresher for later in the season. Like the Giants do believe that they're a playoff team, and I think that they're a fringe playoff team, so they could easily get there. So they kind of probably want to keep a few of their players fresher for later in the season, and this might be a way to do that.
Yeah, I think that would be smart if that's what they're doing. I just feel like all of these wide receivers are almost like the same profile of wide receiver, so that I find that pretty interesting. I think Sterling Shepard is the type of wide receiver that seemed like he should have had a better career by now, but he's always been plagued by injuries. Wandale Robinson is basically Tony's replacement. He was drafted to kick Tony out the door. I think Darius Slayton is someone who could be pretty good for them if he's the healthiest wide receiver that knows the playbook. And I think that both Cole Beasley and Crowder are probably going to get pushed out once Shepard and Wandale are back and healthy. That's my guess.
Agreed.
But speaking of Kadarius Tony, that Wandale Robinson's replacing, the the Chiefs wideout just underwent knee surgery to clean up some cartilage, and they say he should be ready by the regular season, but I think this is his second knee issue of the offseason, Jeff. So does that scare you with Tony? Are you high on Tony? Is he super far down your list? How do you feel about Tony going into this season?
So Tony is going to be a late round flyer for me at this point, like double digit rounds. But I don't think this really impacts my ranking of him too much because I do think his upside, if everything worked out correctly for this, outweighs any risk that you would be getting with Tony. Obviously, a second corrective knee surgery in the offseason is not ideal, but hopefully this is the one that corrects it. As we know with OBJ, with his ACL tear, we know that his first ACL reconstruction was not done appropriately. So it is possible that Tony has the same situation where his first knee surgery wasn't done correctly and needed a second cleanup. And hopefully we see him some in the preseason because I do think that he could benefit from a few snaps in the preseason.
I'm not a fan of when it comes to cartilage damage in a knee to just
I'm not a
put
fan of
out.
that either.
Yeah, not a fan of that in general, but the procedure, there's two methods to clean that up. One is to stitch it back up, and then you're out for a longer period of time, but it's better for the long-term health of both the player and his career. And that's something that I'm most concerned with for players. I'm not a fan of when they decide to just clip it. And it's a shorter recovery time, but it's worse for their long-term health. So I'm not a fan of that, especially for a football player who's going to put a lot of pressure on their knees. So I don't think that Tony is long for the NFL. In my opinion, I think he will probably play his way out of it, and I think he hasn't really done much to this point anyway. So we'll see if his knee's okay enough to play. We'll see. This year, we don't really know who the top wideout is going to be. Obviously, we all know that Kelsey's the best receiver on that group, but we have no idea who's going to shake out as the wide receiver number one for the Chiefs this year between Tony and MVS and Rasheed Rice and Sky Moore and Justin Ross and the other Watson, as I like to call him. No idea how this shakes out and which guy is going to be the top dog. And this doesn't help Tony, that's for sure.
That's correct. We have some sad news for Buffalo Bills fans as running back Naheem Hines is going to miss the 2023 NFL season. He got into a jet ski accident with a pretty severe knee injury, and it will require surgery. What do the Bills do to replace Hines, and what do you see for their outlook this season?
Well, they had previously brought in Latavius Murray, and now they also brought in Darrington Evans to kind of fill the void there. I think a lot of people overrated Naheem Hines, in my opinion. Yes, he's a decent receiving back, but they had Singletary last year. They also drafted Cook last year. I think Cook is going to be the top dog, both as the running back and as the receiving back. I do think that they're missing a punt returner, so I don't know who's going to take over the return duties now. But I don't like to see any player injured. I'm not rooting against any player. I'm sorry for Hines that his career got derailed again, and this time not even by a football injury, but a jet ski injury. It's supposed to be fun. It's not supposed to hurt you. I'm sorry for him. Darrington Evans, though, now is relevant again in fantasy circles because he's on a team. He might even end up being the number one backup behind Cook this year because I don't think Latavius Murray is super impressive, and I'm not a big fan of Harris, so I think Darrington could really push for that spot. But it's really any of those three could be the backup for Cook. But I'm really hoping that Cook explodes this year, and now being basically the sole receiving back, I think he will.
Yeah, I think Cook has a really good shot this year. I do like Damian Harris more than you do, only because this is not a type of running back that the Buffalo Bills have had. And this could be a running back that takes some of the pressure off of Josh Allen, and they really, 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 really need him to stop running the football so much. But again, 1 year deal, so we'll see how much he actually stops running because of this 1 year deal.
I don't know. I think Latavius Murray is kind of like an older version of Harris, so I think he's kind of similar.
I do prefer the youth when it comes to the grounder and pounder, though.
The youth. Ah.
Less tread on the or more tread on the tires, less worn off.
Yeah. Well, we'll see how that goes. We'll see how the running back corral shakes out. But that does it for another episode of the Never Too Early Fantasy Football Podcast. Thank you all for listening and downloading this episode. Please don't forget to like and subscribe. Leave us a comment and share the show. Every little bit helps.
As always, you can find us with our handle at N2EFantasy on Spotify, YouTube, TikTok, Facebook, Instagram, Twitter, and Threads. Please give us a follow. Until next time, take care of yourselves, and remember, it's truly never too early for fantasy football. Thank you again.
Bye, everybody.